It was a chilly weekend night, and my 7-year-old son, Corey, was hosting a sleepover with 4 of his friends. My wife wasn't home, so it was my job to keep an eye on the chaos without making it too obvious. You know how kids are. They hate being watched too closely. And I didn't want to be that parent. Still, my wife had made it very clear before she left. Check in on them, often. For the most part, they were doing fine. A little noisy, sure, but that's how sleepovers go. When things got too loud or too quiet, I'd sneak over to the bedroom door and just listen. Most of the time, I'd hear them talking loudly, arguing over whose Lego piece was whose, or trading ridiculous stories about school. No harm, no foul. I let them have their fun and went back to the living room, sinking into the couch to watch some TV. But then I heard it. A strange, rhythmic tapping sound coming from Corey's room. It sounded like something was tapping against the window. I muted the TV and listened more closely. It happened again. Tap, tap, tap. I almost got up to check, but then thought better of it. Probably just one of the boys messing around and maybe throwing toys at the window or something. I shrugged it off, unmuted the TV, and sank back into my seat. Boys will be boys, right? A little later, the noise stopped. Completely. Now, if you've ever been around a group of 7-year-olds, you know silence is a red flag. These kids weren't the quiet type. And if they were suddenly hushed, it probably meant they'd broken something or were up to no good. I got up, my gut already churning with unease, and walked back down the hall toward Corey's room. I stood outside the door for a moment, listening. At first, it was hard to make anything out, but then I heard it. Quiet giggling, followed by faint whispers. It was strange, almost unnatural, like they were sharing some secret they shouldn't be. That whispering. It wasn't the kind that comes from kids trying to hide something harmless. It was off. I opened the door, half expecting to catch them in the middle of some prank, but all I saw were 4 of them, sitting in a mess of Legos and toys scattered across the floor. They looked up at me, wide-eyed but not alarmed. Corey gave me a sheepish grin, as if they were just caught in the middle of some silly game. But something wasn't right. The window was open. It was November. Why would the window be open? Corey, I told you to keep the window shut. It's cold out, and you don't want any bugs getting in, I said, trying to sound casual. But my voice wavered. I told them to keep it down and left, still feeling uneasy. As I headed to the bathroom, I couldn't shake the nagging sensation that something was wrong. Just as I passed the small window in the hallway, something moved outside. It was quick, just a shadow gliding past. But it was enough to make me freeze. I stood there for a second, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe one of the neighborhood kids was cutting through the yard, but the more I thought about it, the more that sinking feeling grew. I hurried back to Corey's room and pushed the door open, my heart now racing. This time, I took a closer look. Something hit me all at once. There were only 4 boys. Tom, Corey's friend, was gone. Panic spiked through me like ice water. "Where's Tom?" I asked, my voice tight. Corey and the other boys looked at me, confused, then pointed toward the window. Corey spoke up, his voice casual, like what he was saying made perfect sense. He left with the pirate to go find the treasure. My blood ran cold. Panic hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, trying to process what Corey had just said. He left with the pirate to go find the treasure. My heart sank, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Tom was gone, out the window, with some stranger. I bolted out of the room, down the hall, and out the front door, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I scanned the street. My eyes darted across the dimly lit road, and then I saw them. A man, hunched and wearing a tattered jacket, was holding Tom's hand. He was leading him toward an old, beat-up tan Toyota Corolla parked a little down the street. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Hey, stop!" The man turned at the sound of my voice. For a moment, our eyes locked. His face was shadowed by the dim light, but there was something twisted in the way he grinned at me, like he'd been caught but didn't care. In an instant, He let go of Tom's hand, sprinted to the driver's side of the car, and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life as the car screeched away, tires squealing as it sped down the street and out of sight. I tried to catch the license plate, but it was too dark, too fast. Tom stood there, frozen in place, wide-eyed and pale, like he couldn't believe what had just happened. I ran over, scooped him up, and rushed him back inside, locking the front door behind us. My hands shook as I locked every window, every door, every possible way that someone could get in. I couldn't breathe right. My chest was tight, and my mind was racing with what-ifs. I called all the other kids' parents, immediately telling them what had happened and urging them to come pick up their children. Tom's parents arrived first, their faces a mix of fear and anger. They were upset at first, understandably. They had trusted me with their son. But once I explained everything, the man, the pirate voice, the open window, they realized how close we had come to losing him. They thanked me, but I could see the horror in their eyes, the same horror that was gnawing at me. When the last child was picked up and the house was empty and quiet, I finally sat down, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. The thought of some stranger, some predator, getting so close to my son and his friends. It felt like a nightmare, but this was real. What terrified me the most wasn't just that this man had been in my yard, right outside my son's window. It wasn't even that he almost got away with Tom. No, what haunts me is how easily he gained their trust. A pirate voice. That's all it took. Just a few words, spoken in a playful tone, and a window opened, and a boy almost vanished. All because they thought he was taking them on an adventure. I still check the windows every night. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, that man is still waiting for another chance to knock. It was the end of our freshman year, and like any group of adventurous, my friends and I were itching for something to do. It was me, my best friend Lily, and our other friend Emily. We didn't need much. A spot to smoke, and maybe a little excitement to kill the afternoon. Emily's house was close to a patch of woods, just a short walk away. It seemed perfect at the time. I mean, looking back, I wish we had just stayed behind her house, smoking and watching scary movies or something harmless. But that's not what we did. The woods were easy to get to, and from where we entered, you could still see the street, so it didn't feel too risky. Emily's neighborhood was pretty nice, all clean lawns and quiet streets, except for this one house that sat right next to the woods. It stood out like a sore thumb. Old, rusted, and with a bluish-gray tin roof, it looked like it hadn't seen any upkeep in decades. We always joked about it. The pigs in the backyard, the overgrown weeds. It was like something straight out of The Hills Have Eyes. Creepy, sure, but nothing more than a running joke to us. That day, we didn't think much of it. We made our way into the woods, found a spot to light up, and spent the next hour laughing, talking, just being dumb kids. I honestly wish the day had ended there. Just another stupid memory, but things didn't go that way. We were heading out of the woods, laughing and messing around, when I noticed a bluish-gray Chevy pickup truck parked near the entrance. At first, we didn't think much of it, just some random truck. For fun, we decided to act like idiots and run, laughing like it was all a game. But when the truck's engine revved up and started following us, that's when things got serious. Every time we stopped, the truck stopped too. The laughter faded as the situation became unsettlingly real. It was like some twisted game of cat and mouse, and we were the prey. We sprinted toward a small hill, hoping to lose the truck's line of sight. Heart pounding, I remember ducking behind some bushes, my breath ragged, trying to quiet the panic rising in my throat. The truck passed us, its headlights cutting through the trees like searchlights. We stayed hidden for what felt like forever, trying to convince ourselves it was just a creepy coincidence. When the coast seemed clear, we cautiously stood up, forcing awkward laughs, trying to shake off the tension. But just as we were nearing the exit, we froze. There, blocking our way, were headlights. The truck, again. Only this time, it wasn't moving. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't a joke. Inside the truck, barely visible through the glare of the headlights, I could make out a large man. He was wearing a hat and a red shirt, but his face was obscured by shadow and distance. He wasn't moving either, just sitting there, waiting. Lily pulled out a small pocket knife she carried, her hands shaking. I knew she couldn't handle it, so I took it from her, gripping it tight even though I wasn't sure it would do any good. Without a word, we all turned and bolted back into the woods, not caring which way we went, just desperate to get away. The trees became a blur as we ran, hearts pounding, branches snagging at our clothes. After what felt like hours, we stopped. We were deep in the woods now, far from the truck, gasping for air. No one said a word for a while. We just stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, we found our way back to Emily's house, still shaken. We swore to each other, right then and there, that we would never set foot in those woods again. Months passed, and the memory of that night slowly faded. Though not completely, we never went back to the woods, and for a while, we kept our promise. But then, September 10th came around. Emily's birthday. There were more of us this time, 6 girls, 2 boys, safety in numbers, right? We figured it would be fine, convinced ourselves we were just overreacting before. Besides, it was Emily's birthday, and we needed somewhere to smoke again. The woods didn't feel as intimidating with a larger group. We wandered for a while, chatting and laughing like nothing bad had ever happened there. That's when we came across a path the 3 of us, me, Emily, and Lily, had noticed on one of our previous trips but had never explored. Feeling bold, we decided to check it out. What could go wrong? The path led to a fork, splitting in 2 directions. We took the left fork first, curious to see where it went. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a half-finished abandoned building. It was eerie, like someone had started construction and just stopped. Scattered around were saws, hanging from strings tied between trees like some twisted decoration. There was an old fire pit too, but it didn't look like it had been used in years. We laughed it off, maybe because we were stoned, maybe because none of us wanted to admit how unsettling it actually was. But something about the place felt off. We could all sense it, even if no one said anything out loud. Deciding the left path had nothing more to offer, we turned back and headed down the right fork. That's when everything took a dark turn. Further down the path, we found something we never could have prepared for. A hangman-like structure stood in the middle of a clearing. A noose dangled from it, swaying lightly in the breeze. Nearby, an old pair of shoes lay discarded in the dirt next to a shovel, half buried in the ground as if someone had been digging recently. The scene felt fresh, like we had just missed something horrible. The air around us felt thick, like it was closing in. We stopped dead in our tracks, the laughter long gone. No one said a word, but I could feel the panic rising in the group. We were in the middle of something we didn't understand. The feeling that had been nagging me since the truck followed us months ago came flooding back. We snapped a few pictures, our hands shaking, more out of instinct than anything. Then we bolted, tearing through the trees, not caring where we were going, just needing to get out. The woods suddenly felt suffocating, like they were swallowing us whole. When we finally made it back to Emily's house, none of us spoke. We didn't need to. We all knew what we were thinking. The man in the pickup truck, the one who had chased us that first night, he had something to do with this. We'd only just escaped back then. And now it felt like we had seen something we were never supposed to see. I'll never go back into those woods again. And to this day, I can't stop thinking about how close we came to becoming part of whatever was happening there. We weren't supposed to make it out. I'm sure of that now. I live alone in a quiet rural town just a couple of blocks away from my parents. It's peaceful here, almost too peaceful sometimes, but I've always liked the calm. My mom, though, she worries about me constantly. She's in her 60s now, and her memory isn't what it used to be. She's got mild dementia, so it's understandable that she gets anxious, but lately her worry has started to feel suffocating. A few years back, I gave her a spare key to my house, thinking it would help her feel more at ease. Now, I'm starting to regret that decision. She's made it a habit of letting herself in whenever she feels like it, usually because she's convinced something is wrong. I'll be out late with friends at the local bar or just trying to unwind, and I'll come home to find her sitting on my couch, wringing her hands, waiting for me like I'm still a kid. It's gotten to the point where I'll see her car parked outside and feel a knot of dread in my stomach. I know it sounds ridiculous. People always ask why I don't just set some boundaries, tell her to stop. But you don't know my mom. She's this tiny, fragile woman who would give you the shirt off her back. And even though her mind isn't as sharp as it used to be, she's still my mom. The idea of upsetting her is just impossible. So I let it slide, even though it's become an almost nightly occurrence. Every time I think about saying something, I just imagine her sad, confused face, and I can't bring myself to do it. That Saturday night started like so many others. I had been out with friends, enjoying drinks at the only bar worth going to in this quiet town. By the time I left, it was nearly 2 a.m., and I was a little unsteady on my feet. The walk home was short, just a few blocks, but in my hazy state, I fumbled for my keys when I reached the front door. That's when I noticed it was already unlocked. I sighed. Asterisk, asterisk, mom dot asterisk, asterisk. She must have come by again. It was something she'd been doing more often lately, and I was almost used to it by now. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar scent of home greeting me. The kitchen light was on, and there, on the counter, was a note written in her loopy handwriting. Asterisk, you left this at our house. Next to it was a half-eaten cake from my parents. I didn't even think twice. I assumed she'd dropped by, maybe tidied up a bit, and as usual, decided to wait for me upstairs. Hearing soft footsteps above me, I sighed again, feeling a mix of annoyance and exhaustion. She must have gone up to sleep in the guest bed, something she did whenever she stayed too late. Mom? I called out, my voice echoing through the still house. No answer. The footsteps stopped. I headed upstairs, expecting to see her, bundled up in the bed. But when I got there, the guest room was empty. The bed, untouched. A growing unease crept up my spine. I checked the bathrooms. Empty. Every other room upstairs. Empty. The house was silent now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My stomach twisted. What if she was having one of her episodes? Sometimes, with her dementia, she would get confused and wander off. My mind raced as I grabbed the phone and quickly dialed my dad's number. After what felt like an eternity, he finally answered, his voice groggy. Hey, Dad? I blurted out. I think Mom's wandering around upstairs in my house, but I can't find her. There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was sharper, fully awake now. That's not possible, he said slowly. She's right here, sleeping next to me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned my head towards the dark staircase. In the dim light coming from the kitchen, I saw it. Something that made my blood turn to ice. At the top of the stairs, just peeking around the corner, was a head. A face, watching me from the shadows. I froze, my mind screaming at me to move, but my body wouldn't listen. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that figure. The realization hit me all at once. That wasn't my mom, asterisk, asterisk. I screamed into the phone, dropping it as I bolted out the front door, my heart racing. I didn't stop running until I reached my parents' house, breathless and shaking. My dad was still on the line, trying to make sense of what I'd said, but I could barely explain. I just kept running, trying to escape the horrifying image burned into my mind. When I finally reached my parents' house, I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. My mom was already at the door, her face filled with concern as she rushed over to hug me. She immediately started asking what was wrong, her voice trembling with worry. Between gasps, I told her about the footsteps, the unlocked door, and the figure I'd seen at the top of the stairs. As she listened, she looked genuinely confused. "I did come by," she admitted, her voice soft and apologetic. "I cleaned up the kitchen a bit and brought over the cake. But I swear, I locked the door when I left." My dad and I exchanged glances, both of us unsure whether to believe her. Her memory had been slipping more and more lately, so the idea of her forgetting to lock up wasn't far-fetched. But something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. Still, we didn't push it. We were too rattled. Within minutes, the police arrived at my parents' house. They escorted us back to mine, 2 officers heading inside while one stayed with us on the porch. The night was eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every distant rustle of leaves made my skin crawl. It felt like hours passed before the officers came back outside. They told us the house was clear. They had checked every room, the attic, the crawl space, anywhere someone could hide. There was no sign of forced entry and no indication that anyone had been inside, apart from the unlocked door. I tried to explain again what I'd seen, but the officers just exchanged glances. One of them gently suggested that maybe, with my mom's dementia in the late hour, my mind might have played tricks on me. I nodded, but I didn't believe it. I knew what I saw. That night, I didn't feel safe enough to sleep in my house, so I stayed at my parents' place. Lying in the guest bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the image of that head peering around the corner over and over in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it clearer, those eyes watching me from the darkness. Since then, my dad has put a stop to my mom coming over alone. A decision that leaves me feeling both relieved and sad. I know it's for her safety, but part of me misses those little visits, no matter how inconvenient they were. Still, I can't shake the paranoia. Some nights, when I finally moved back into my house, I'd lie awake in the dark, listening for the slightest sound, because deep down, I'm not convinced that the figure I saw was just in my head. What if they're still here? What if they never left? Somewhere, hidden in the walls, or the attic, or watching me from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to show themselves again. The thought creeps into my mind every night, and no matter how hard I try, I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone in this house.